glad to be here. Thank you for having us. It's really interesting to be exploring the topics of tarot and astrology in the context of 2020, where quite a bit has happened. And I'll offer that a great way for us to dive into this is to look a little bit at what is happening in the stars right now, and Palōmi can guide us through that. And then we can use tarot as a framework that we can use to move between our cerebral or mental understanding of things into the kind of spiritual, heart centered feeling of things. So I'll stand back for a moment and let Palōmi speak her truth.
Hey everyone, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you, Canopy, for having us. This is an interesting time we're in. We're in a really important reflection and cycle of revisiting and reflecting upon decisions and structures that we've created in the past that are clearly no longer serving us and actually have not served us for a long time, but there hasn't been enough collective awareness to bring these issues through. And a really interesting conjunct that we're currently in today, we happen to be in our Gemini sun, our Aquarius moon. It's a void of course moon, so it tends to feel like it has less energy and less friction or resource at the moment, like void of moon courses do, which can happen every few days after a big full moon like we just had. Speaking of that full moon, we just had an eclipsed full moon in Sagittarius last Friday night, and that carried quite a bit of energy for so many reasons. Mainly, something I'd love to highlight and just notice is that we are currently in a cycle of our Gemini South Node, I'm sorry, Gemini North Node, Sagittarius South Node. And whenever we have a full moon, especially an eclipsed moon hitting a South Node conjunct the way that it did for our full moon in this current cycle we're actually still in, there tends to be a lot of energy around bringing up the past, bringing up old traditions, bringing up energies and decisions and the architecture, the structure, the systems that we built a long time ago that we must show up to release and to purge, to clear and to reevaluate, to eliminate and rebuild actually from a new foundation altogether. And so South Node is our karmic energy. It's the imprint of where we've come from, what wounds we're carrying, and what imprints and impressions we still have activating and agitating us in our current reality, and how they're no longer serving us or need more attention to be cleared and reconsidered. And then we have that conjunct of full moon energy, which is already about this incredible release, this purification, this commitment to freedom and justice. It's quite the powerful time. And especially when we think about the last week and a half that we've had around the BLM movement and how important it is to reevaluate our actual American history and where we have built so much of these foundations on the literal backs and the labor, emotionally, physically, and otherwise, of our Black Americans and our African American slaves, and how that does not work, and the inherent systemic racism that still exists is deeply wounding and important for us to consider, unlearn, and recreate structures for, especially in support of. And so being not racist clearly isn't even enough anymore. It's about being actively anti-racist in a cycle like this. And we're in this beautiful Saturn entrance of Aquarius, but it's also going retrograde for a little bit. And it will be until it goes forward motion again in about a month and a half. And with that Saturn Aquarius, it's all about what the hard lessons are that we are here to learn that are in service to our collective awakening, to our collective healing, and to the service of all beings, all bodies. It cannot be a more hierarchical or personal perspective any longer, like Saturn, when it's in Capricorn, sometimes is. And so we're in this opening that's quite brilliant, and Jupiter has been in Capricorn for a long time, Jupiter being our ability to unlock fortune and recreate abundance from a different place. And that in conjunct with the wisdom and the structure and the systematic change that Capricorn represents is just a powerful time. That's a lot of things at once. I'd love for you to jump in well whenever you like. I know we jam out on this together, so love your
Yeah, what I love about what you just shared is it's very much about the currents that we are working with and the ways in which we can extract some of the movements that are happening in these bodies to find a little bit of meaning in what is taking place right now. And what I'm going to focus in on is a little bit of the why, in terms of why look to a system like astrology or look to a system like tarot to derive meaning from these things. What value could there be there? And I remember that it's an especially poignant time to consider systems like this, as these systems we've relied on for our meaning are beginning to break down. The ways in which we get our news and the ways in which we're told our history, we are realizing that there are misconceptions and biases that are embedded within the very structures that are providing us this information. Tarot has emerged for me as something that I work with quite a bit, uh, because my work is strategy. I work in the media industry and I provide strategy, which is a lot about storytelling and figuring out where have we come from and where are we going. And I use a lot of different data tools for that, a lot of different insights, analyses, practices. And as soon as I discovered that that was the very same skill set that lives in tarot and astrology as well, I just really, really grabbed onto it, investigated a little bit deeply, more deeply, what is going on here. And what I learned is that in tarot we have a book that has been captured of the human experience. Our history is captured in this book, and it's not told through a series of facts and dates, but it's told through a series of experiences. So there is, first off, some really deliberate correspondences between astrology and in the tarot, and we can dive into that, and we will dive into that. But I'd like to share a little bit some of the foundations for tarot specifically in terms of where these threads go back to in human history. There are two primary sides to a tarot deck. There is the minor arcana and the major arcana. The minor arcana really poignantly emerged in terms of capturing some truth telling about the human experience that was learned through the mysteries of the mystery schools, going back to even the Greeks, that survived the plague. And it was a way in which we captured the dynamics of the human experiences in this book of life that is living in a deck of cards that has four suits with numbers 1 through 10 and a royal suite on top of them. That should sound really familiar because the deck of playing cards that we have today, that we experience in casinos and in poker nights, comes directly from the minor arcana, which has so much more meaning underneath it. And I'll dive into that in a second. The major arcana comes from the Egyptian Book of Thoth. So, where the minor arcana took its form really in Marseille, France, after the plague, recapturing some of these old truths, the old truths of the Egyptian mystery schools are captured in the major arcana. And this is numbered 1 through 20, and these are all of these majorly archetypal entities and passages and experiences that were documented as having significance in a human life. And this is where astrology really comes into play. So I'll dive into that for a moment and say, for example, that we have this interesting conjunction that is happening in the stars right now between Pluto, Saturn, and Jupiter. And I've got three cards right here that are from the major arcana that correspond to those cards. So for Jupiter, you have the Wheel of Fortune. And this is a card that has a standalone meaning in and of itself. And it's very, very connected to the ideas of abundance and fortune and things related to business and manifestation that are embodied in the knowledge contained within the idea of Jupiter astrology. When that comes up in a reading, that means that that is an active archetype that is playing out in your life. For Saturn, the major arcana card is the World. And this is a card that really represents the cosmos and just sort of the broad truths of what it is in the world that we inhabit. And those two are really coming together. One of the things about Jupiter and the Wheel of Fortune is sometimes you're up, sometimes you're down, but the wheel keeps on turning. And so this is really a conjunction of the turning of the fortunes of the entire world. So what was once up is now down, and what was now down, or what was down is now up. Combining that with the energy of Pluto, which is represented by this fun card, the Judgment card, really stands for the end of one eon and the beginning of another. Pluto is this kind of deep space, cosmic reformation energy. And it's very, very fascinating to see how you look at a conjunction like that and the stories that are told in the tarot when you put them together reflects what maybe Palōmi might have to say about that conjunction from an astrological perspective.
Yeah, beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. It's so powerful right now to have Jupiter and Pluto conjunct in this particular moment in time and in history. It's not only deeply transformative, but it's a call to action and an awareness at a greater level than we've ever had access to in a long time. Jupiter being our planet of expansion and fortune, like you said, Will, as well as Pluto being deep transmutation and transformation, is an incredible conjunct to be working with. In a way, the stars are in our favor to really illuminate and elucidate some of the challenges that we've been having as a culture and as a society that can offer us insight, wisdom, and an ability to traverse ahead with more of the intelligence of honoring where we have been and where that hasn't worked, where that's been oppressive and systematically painful and in fact manipulative and a misuse of power dynamics in so many ways. Power comes up so strongly with Pluto. Pluto tends to be the ruler of Scorpio alongside Mars, and when we think about the energy of Scorpio, we think about its ability to heal, its ability to find truth, its ability to be piercing and discerning and to bring through, the underworld. Death, rebirth, transmutation, transformation can come through with these energies of Pluto. And Pluto so strongly here in alignment with Jupiter, as you were just mentioning, has this incredible energy, to not only bring forth a transformation, but also to allow for the release and the death and complete regeneration of the energies that don't serve and do not bring up what is meant for our collective Saturn Aquarius cycle, which is really around the well-being, the integration, and the support for all. So there's something incredible about this moment that so deeply supports where we are and what's available. And in general, with Jupiter and its ability to expand, it will simply amplify the energies of what's happening naturally in all of the signs, all of the planets. And from that perspective, when Jupiter is touching a planet like Pluto, which is all about this regeneration and transmutation, there's a true ability to open into and look more closely at the minutia of what hurts, of what is broken, of what has created pain and breakdowns as a society, and how we can look at that more closely, inquire deeply from that investigative, very Plutonian Scorpionic perspective, and also really commit to relinquishing any power from a lack of integrity and bringing power back into integrity by reestablishing what authenticity, integrity, and allyship can be in a moment like this. And so I feel grateful, and I also feel the deep weight and responsibility and awareness of this particular moment.
Yeah, it's so fascinating looking at 2020 in terms of I've seen a couple of moments, especially at the beginning of the year. One in particular, there's this account on Instagram that I follow, Overheard in LA, and one of their little posts that they had was, if astrology is real, why didn't they see this coming? The comments section was full of people saying, "My astrologer told me that this was coming. This is," and it just thousands and thousands of comments of people talking about, no, this was very much discussed in the astrological community. And it's interesting to see something like that transpire because I don't think that it could ever be a satisfying proof point for anybody that carries a skeptical vision of astrology, because astrology is never going to tell you this is going to happen at this time. In the same way that the history of humanity is embedded in tarot, not in a way that says, here's what happened in 1776, but it can tell you that that was the last time that Saturn, I believe it was moving through Capricorn. And so there's this sense of this return, right? Where we go back to our roots and we say, what was the world that we were born into, and are we being true to that? And time in our story is told in this cyclical manner, not in this linear manner. And as we enter these different zones, we start to be able to pick up different ideas and feelings that are worth revisiting or are called for revisiting. And in the year 2020, these are very, very heavy things that we're being called to revisit, that are embodied in what Palōmi described with the conjunction there, and as mapped to the symbology that is contained within the cards that represent each of these planets. So they're not telling us facts. They're not giving us that kind of information. They're giving us archetypes. And that's experienced in the way that myths change, in the way that the stories that we tell ourselves change. And that plays out in pop culture. For example, I was discussing with some friends yesterday the difference between the characters of James Bond and Batman in the 90s versus James Bond and Batman in the 2000s. The way that how those archetypes were presented all of a sudden became vulnerable, all of a sudden started taking damage and weren't just floating through a dream world. That's how our myths change. The way that which we relate to just our characters that we talk about and the characters that we identify with. That's the current that things like tarot and astrology move through and work with. So I'm going to dig in a little bit more on the suits of the tarot. This is the minor arcana. And this is one that is a lot easier to work with in the major arcana. A lot of the correspondences with zodiacs and planets in the major arcana, you kind of have to just learn it by rote and association, and it's less of an underlying framework and more of just a book of knowledge that you kind of have to study to begin to work with. But the 4 suits across 10 numbers each with the royal suits, that is for me, it's a lot easier for me to handle. So I have the 4 aces here, 4 of a kind, right, for each of these different suits. And I have them ordered in a very deliberate sequence, and I'll share a little bit more about what that sequence is. Clubs in the poker hand, which is wands in the tarot deck. And that corresponds with the element of fire, and that is associated with the sense of creativity and urges and sexuality and relationships. It's the fire that we feel within. And numbers 1 through 10 on the suit of wands tells us the story of what it is to live through our fire, to live through these urges. And then you have swords, which in the poker deck is represented by spades. And this corresponds with the element of air. And that relates to the mental plane, our mental body. If wands were our fire body, this is our mental body. And this is where ideas and knowledge and skills really come to bear. So when it comes to studying tarot, for example, containing all of this information in one's head is very much swords. Remembering all the information of all the planets in the zodiac, that is swords. Knowing what we show up to work for and create emails around and come up with strategies and 12-month plans, that's swords. Element of wind. Then what follows is cups, which corresponds to hearts in the poker deck. And this is emotions. This is the emotional plane. It's also related to our health. This is something that COVID was very much a cups experience. It was about our inner health and our inner emotions in the same ways in which this moment that we're experiencing in the last couple of weeks, this movement, is about fire. It's about power. It's about the human experience and the way in which we're able to speak our truth without having to translate it. Lastly, you have pentacles, which is diamonds in the poker head. This is very much related to earth as an element, and it's about manifestation. So you can have all of these talents, you can have all these urges and these ideas to make people feel a certain way, but when you can manifest it into something that is concrete and transactional that you can trade on, that's when it starts to make you money, coins that you can put in your pocket and you can start to build a house with. This is when things really come down to earth, again, that element. The reason that I ordered them in this way is I actually use this as a rubric for the way in which I have myself and my team go through creative development process in the domain of creative strategy. Because the first thing that you have when there's an opportunity to do something meaningful is an urge. You get this fire, and there's something that either you feel is looming that is right, or something that you feel that is looming that is wrong, and you feel the need to do something about it, but you don't know what direction to go in. And that's when you transition to the wind stage, to the sword stage, and you start to put together an idea that, much like the wind coming from a fire, blows in a direction. And so this is where you start to shape your urge into an intellectual thought, and you're progressing a little bit further along the path. After you have that thought manifested that's going to address this urge, you begin to iterate into the testing phase of water, where it can start to take almost, but it's very malleable. And it has some weight to it as well. Water alone can create a canyon, but there's no exact form to it. It's something that is very, malleable. And it's something that you're on the right path when it starts to appeal to people's emotions. When you have something that feels good to people, then you know that you have created something that is either a balm, BALM, for the wounds that were discovered in that fire stage, or is thrilling for something that emerged in the fire stage as an opportunity. Then you get to the last stage of creative development, which is earth and coins, and actually creating something concrete. You're no longer testing the shape and the contours of your idea, but it has something that is actualized, very non-malleable, and it's something that you can then hand to somebody physically, either in the form of a document or a presentation or a sculpture or something that they can really go to and experience. And from there, they can actually unpack and reverse the experience. They can be given the coin in their hands that has a certain meaning that will then take them into an emotional experience that will then manifest in these thoughts and that will bring them back to that urge. And that is very, very much the framework off of which our lives and our society have been formed. So when we go through the book of life on one of these suits, each of these different characteristics of fire, water, or earth is passed through a numerological construct. What is fire against one? What is it against two? What is it against 3 and 4, etc., etc.? So looking at something like the 8 of Wands, this is a card that is really relevant to this moment right now. There are a lot of different junctures in terms of numerological meaning on each of these different tarot cards that we can talk through. But I'll just say that when you arrive at a point of 6, you have gone to that journey where you've created harmony. And you know who you are together and what you stand for. 7 is when something comes in and disrupts that harmony, creates movement, creates motivation. But 8 is when things start to work in unison. And this is very much something to reflect on in this moment, where the last 2 weeks have felt like a 7 of Wands, where this supposed harmony has been disrupted by this new element that has come and thrown things maybe in a way that feels for some out of balance. But when it comes to activating, we're now in the phase where it's about planning, strategizing, and finding ways to work together for larger advocacy. And that is captured in the meaning of the 8 of Wands as a tarot card. This doesn't carry any stories in terms of what happened from this is what happened in the year 1776, again, kind of example. But the very essence of this dimension of human experience is captured in these cards. And so when we do a tarot reading, we lay them out randomly on a table. And at a minimum, Humans are meaning making machines. And when we see a certain layout of cards where that layout has meaning and those cards themselves have meaning and they're put together, it starts to unfold a story that is typically going to be different from the story that we tell ourselves about who we are and what we're a part of. And that's going to challenge us to look at things from another angle. And when you have that kind of challenge, you have an opportunity for healing. It's as though somebody can say, well, what if you looked at what's happening in your life like this? And you're given the opportunity to consider that and take on pieces that serve you and pieces that don't. So I'll stop there. That was a lot of information, and I'll invite Palōmi to step back in and share whatever else you feel is important from the astrological perspective before we open it up for some questions.
Yeah, amazing. I love that you brought up the fire. We're currently also in this Uranus Taurus placement, and Uranus naturally resides resides in Sagittarius, a super fiery planet. It's our planet of unpredictability and unexpected changes. It's our surprise element in the skies. And with Uranus being in Taurus, our sense of ground and home and center is being undeniably rocked and shaken up right now. There's a very particular transit with Uranus and Taurus where our sense of home, whether it is in our bodies, in our brown or black bodies, even, I'll go as far as to say there is a sense of lack of rest or peace or comfort in where we've been living, or what our reality is, what home means, whether it's our home nation or otherwise. And that particular transit can be led to can be guiding us to really reevaluate how we can reestablish home, how we can reestablish our sense of what ground and comfort and stability and safety is in a new way, and in fact to not evaluate that or inquire more closely as to what those things are from a metaphorical or collective perspective even would be to ignore a really big transit that's occurring right now. I also think it's really important to just name that we have a really beautiful Venus retrograde cycle that started around May 12th and 13th, depending on whether you're on the West or East Coast. And we will be going until about June 25th in that retrograde cycle. And here we're deeply inquiring around our sense of value, our sense of worth. This is ruling matters of the heart. Venus is very much connected to the way that we evaluate how we love, the way we relate, the way we connect to other people, other beings, how we hold thoughts and beliefs around love, as well as how we connect to human connection in general, like as a thought and process, but also from our intimate perspective. So we're probably also even reevaluating older relationships, places that we've been, people that we've loved, and revisiting in some way what those have been, what lessons we've learned from them, and what that can mean for us as we move forward in our life and make better, more informed choices or more evolved choices as we have grown and learned some difficult lessons. And because Venus is in the mutable sign of Gemini, there's also this really beautiful capacity for the duality, for the connection to the darkness and the light, for the connection of the beauty and what is ugly in our world right now, and how we are relating to things that, you know, can be triggering and volatile, as well as those things that are graceful and beautiful and unifying. Especially in a moment like this, we're seeing the collection of all of those things in the full spectrum, where, you know, we are seeing this beautiful unification, people coming together, this call to action in so many ways that is bringing us closer than ever, as well as this increase in violence and brutality, or at least the awareness and the publication of these horrible things that we're seeing across media and the news right now. And so it's interesting to hold the duality and also hold a greater understanding of looking in reflection of, and holding a higher perspective to evaluate and reevaluate where we've been, how we relate, the choices we make intimately and collectively in our choices. It's also very much connected to, of course, as Gemini being such a mutable sign that rules Mercury, how we think about things, how we are communicating what we think, how we feel, and what's occurring currently. The way that retrogrades work is they're also carrying this inherent reorganizing effect and impact. So even the way we're thinking through things, our language, our communication, our ways of being, we can really evaluate and consider how they're outdated or they're not serving us any longer, and what that means for us as we want to make progress and move forward and forge ahead with new ways, with new abilities to recreate the reality that we're currently working with right now.
So I have some questions for you, actually, Palōmi. So retrogrades seem to be having this moment. Everybody all of a sudden is talking about Mercury retrograde. What should people know about retrogrades, and also why do you think this idea of Mercury retrograde has burst into the mainstream?
Yeah, totally. Well, Mercury retrograde is almost like a popularized meme for astrology as a whole. I love seeing the different images of what it means to have Mercury in retrograde, like laptops, catching on fire, and communication breakdowns and missed schedules and things like that. Retrograde as an overarching thing is actually leading and lending to this important moment to reevaluate, to reconsider, to rehearse and review everything that we've already seen, already done, or choices that we've made. It's coming back to in a form of a greater review through the lens of the stars of like what we need to look at again closely, and maybe change the point of decision that we made, as well as the place that we made those decisions from and why, and begin to evolve. It's actually an opportunity for revolution and evolution. And with that, in Venus, with the Venus retrograde, it's a powerful cycle because, like I said, matters of the heart, matters of intimacy, communication, relationship to other, but also relationship to the collective. How have we related to Black bodies and Black people historically and up until now in America? How have we addressed racism as we intimately work with and co-create with, and perhaps even are in active relationship with different races and different people? Like, how have we considered that in the past, and how have we been blind to so many of those ways, and what can we learn here now?
It's super interesting what you shared about that happening in Gemini as well, and how that affords us the strength to hold two things in mind at once and then think about our relationships between dualities. That seems to be something that's very, very present right now in terms of recognizing the duality of the worlds that we live in, right? That there can be one experience that is so different for people based on the color of their skin. It would seem that what you're describing with Venus retrograde is the prism through which that can come into a little bit more focus from an inner vantage point. Let's open up to any questions that people might have.
Yeah, I would love that. It looks like, well, they're curious what deck you're using for tarot and if you have any recommendations.
Yeah, I use a few different decks. So this one that I've been showing some cards here, this is the Rider-Waite Tarot deck, and that is kind of regarded as the classic. It's the one that really emerged from the Golden Dawn in the turn of from the 19th to the 20th century, and it brought tarot back to the zeitgeist at that time for our sort of century of, of reference. But when I talk about Marseille, France being the source of the minor arcana, there's a Marseille tarot deck that's very authentic to where that came from and how that was, seeded across Europe through the Dark Ages. And there is the Thoth tarot deck, which was created by Crowley around the same time as the Rider-Waite tarot deck, that seeks to be more authentic to the Egyptian book of Thoth and the major arcana. And they have really, really different essences between them. And I've got, let's see, one, two, three, four, five different tarot decks. I have a sixth coming in the mail, which is one that Salvador Dali made in the 80s. That should be arriving today. And all of them seem to work for different aspects of the ask. So the Rider-Waite one is very beautifully rendered images that make it very clear on a storytelling standpoint what we're talking about here. So like when we're talking about that Eight of Wands, I mean, working in unison is clearly depicted in the image itself, whereas in the Thoth deck, it's all extremely abstract and really focus on the underlying energies and numerologies related to it. So it takes a little bit more study to be able to work with that, but it takes you deeper into the heart going on, and tends to be a little bit more challenging too. Like I see the stories that I want to see when I'm using the Rider Waite deck a little bit more often, whereas the Toth deck sort of has a more powerful reframe every time I use it, because I kind of it helps me see past the stories that I'm deluding myself with. So that's also something that changes between decks in terms of what some of the meanings of these decks are. So in the Crowley Toth deck, Justice card is adjustment. So it's really about a rebalancing of things, and it focuses on that. The Judgment card is about eon. It's not about the end of things, but it's about the end of one era and the beginning of another. What I love about the Dolly deck that I'm getting is that the Devil card, which represents Capricorn on the zodiac, and also the self, and sort of urges from this, very much the ego in certain decks, is very, very clearly represented in that deck as delusion, is what that is. Error, sort of getting things wrong because of the way that the self kind of masks you from the truth of experience. So each have their own little twist on things that kind of reinforces what their the way that they color the story. And so I like to have a variety at my disposal.
Are there any other questions that people have? Oh, I see there's a couple things in the chat box. Okay, so a couple people had to leave. Anyone else? But Will and Palōmi, I mean, so I'm not very familiar with tarot and astrology, so this has been super interesting learning more about it. Oh wait, Sarah just asked, like maybe Palōmi, you can tell everyone what you offer with your tarot readings and with your astrology readings. Palōmi, are you there? Oh, it looks like she's left.
So we can follow up with that information. She has some information on it, so all of that's contained within.
Oh, how about you, Will? Well, can you show what you can offer with your readings?
Sure. It's funny. Uh, I I charge $33 for an hour-long session, and the reason that I do that is because I've found that it's important for people to pay some fee to value the message that they receive. So I would be happy to do readings for people, and that's the rate that I work with, is $33 for an hour. But what matters to me most is sitting down, having that conversation, meeting people, and working through some stories together. It's that alone is a gift for me, but that's become the rate based on that aspect of the experience. Giving something helps people get something.
And how did you get into this? What drew you into tarot reading?
Oh my goodness. I first got a tarot deck, a Robin Wood tarot deck, when I was about 10 years old. And I remember sitting on my floor in my house trying to figure it out. They all have these like little books that come with them, and it was too complicated for me. I just couldn't wrap my head around it. So I kind of let that go, and it's funny, I just got another Robin Wood tarot deck about 3 months ago, and seeing how far I've come in my understanding, and maybe the development of my cerebral cortex to be able to wrap my mind around astrology. And recently, it was something that, what brought me back into it is I was really called to revisit my spiritual practice about 3 years ago. And my father was a Renzai Zen Buddhist priest. We had very much like a spiritual household that I grew up in, so it's always been a part of me. But I kind of separated my day-to-day life from from really focusing on this kind of stuff. I was way more focused on like my music career and my media career. And I would say actually some reading of the Kabbalah brought me back into tarot, because I didn't realize that they were connected. They're deeply, intimately connected. And when I discovered that, I was like, awesome, let's get a deck, let's dive in. And then that's when I uncovered that there was all of this knowledge that was hidden in each of the different cards, and that there was this enriching exercise to try to learn about it, because there were sort of encoded secrets about how to live your life based on how other people have lived their lives. That was really, really rewarding. So I just became like a sponge, and really just drank it up. And oddly, that was timed with a little bit of a cultural moment that's still emerging for tarot. And so when people would come over to my house and they would see the decks there, they would ask for readings, and I would start giving readings. And it kind of brought itself into my life in this way. And I didn't really pursue it in that way. It's just continued to more potency. And I just keep saying yes to these invitations like this one to, share a little bit of what I've learned about it, because it seems to have this increasing value in the world. And I think that it's having an increasing value in the world because we are seeing the collapse of the systems that we've relied on to get meaning from. And so we're looking back to some of the older ones that were there and seeing if there's some value that we had overlooked. Some questions here, I say. Best way to contact me to set up a reading, willcady@gmail.com. I'll just drop that in the chat, actually. Just send me an email, and we can do that. And it's been really, really a beautiful thing to do during this quarantine experience, because this is such a moment of transformation for everybody. And tarot can help us sort of unpack what is the nature of the transformation that we're going through. See a couple questions here. What do you think of many sites that offer 1-card readings, 3-card readings from the internet? Does it mean if we do a 12-card reading, we get a better view of things? Is tarot reading only for the situation we're asking about, is not a forecast for the next 3 months, 6 months, 1 year? Okay, so in that question, a lot of that is determined by the spread that you do. One of the kind of surface level tarot readings that I like to do with people is the Fool's Journey, where you basically lay out 12 cards and you've shuffled the Fool card right here into that deck somewhere. And where the Fool card lands represents where you are in the particular journey that you are going through. Some beginning, and you see all that's ahead of you. Sometimes you're at the end, which is really interesting. I've had some people that they got this reading and they were at the end, and we look back and we're like, the message here is that you just got through some pretty rough stuff, but you're at the end of it. Congratulations. So that can be just as valuable. And so you can look at it. It presents itself pretty clearly after a bit based on the numbers that show up and some of the other essences, what kind of time frame we're talking about. Most other readings, though, like the Celtic Cross or the High Priestess spread, they are only talking about the present moment, and the contours of our past and the contours of our future are defined by the present moment, because the present moment is really the only thing that's truly real. And so the tarot helps you sort of set your course as you tell that story about where you came from and where you're going. So the specific answers to your questions are that it's the spreads that dictate that, plus a little bit of the cards. And the sites that offer readings on the internet, I'm actually really wary of a lot of the readings that are done online, particularly because presence is really important for tarot. On the surface, the fact that humans are meaning-making machines, and we can look at a spread of random cards, and there's a principle called aleatoricism, send that there. That is the principle of the human mind's ability to create meaning out of chaos, out of things that are totally random. That's what you might get online. Other stuff happens when you're in person, and it's really freaking cool. So you have to have a connection that is made that creates ceremony and creates space for some of the more profound aspects to actually take place. And I don't believe that that is as possible online as it is in person. What I've done to supplement that during quarantine is some practices to help people connect through some breathing and gazing with the deck itself. And that helps, but I still feel that it's not going the full distance. And so, like randomized shuffled decks on websites, or some of those like Instagram spreads, or like the stories where you stop to choose a card. Like, yeah, there's a little bit of like, order from the chaos that can have some meaning, but you're not getting the full dosage of what something like tarot can do for you.
Oh, again, thank you. And
Yep, there's a
oh,
question.
there we go. Last week, just oh wait, any tarot training sites or books going on with the online ones?
Yeah, so I like the sites Cady Tarot and Keen Tarot. And the way that I use them in a lot of my studying was you pull a spread and you're like, okay, what does this card mean? I totally forget. Really good to look them up for a shorthand in terms of just like, here's like a descriptor. And that was very much like training wheels. At a certain point, though, you've got to take those training wheels off because they are coloring these cards with a meaning that is theirs. And usually the moment in your life matter way more than somebody else's interpretation, but they are really great for quick access, for reminders about what certain cards mean and what sometimes they mean together. And they also have good courses on them. But yes, I just want to caution, remember that they're training wheels and that to really get the full distance, you've got to take the training wheels off at a certain point.
That's great advice. Thank you. If there are not any more questions, I think we could wrap it up. And Will, it's always so great having you on here. I think this is your third talk with us now.
Second.
Is it second? Okay. Yeah, no, it's like they're always so good. And Sarah, thank you so much for helping putting all of these together. So we usually have these on Thursdays, but with the weight of everything that was happening last week, we thought it would be best to move to this week. So there was time to breathe with everything. So we'll be going back to our regular Thursday sessions at 2 o'clock. This has been recorded. It will be on our YouTube page and our Facebook page, which is Canopy Events on YouTube, and canopy.space is our website. Do you have anything more to add, Will?
Just to say thanks to Palōmi for giving her time and her expertise today as well.
Yeah, and Palōmi actually left us. She had nothing to go to, and when she sees this after, thank you for being over here and sharing your knowledge on astrology. All right, everybody, take care, and we'll see you next week. Bye.